Hi, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, welcome. My name is Poppy. It's been a hot minute since I was last on YouTube / uploaded a video, and that's because I got a cold, a really bad cold. So I haven't been posting on my channel, but I'm feeling better, fingers crossed. And I'm back again now. And this video is basically my September wrap up. If I'm gonna be honest, September wasn't a great reading month for me, and that's because, as I said, I was ill, and then at the beginning of this month I started my new job and I was kind of just settling in this month to it. So I've basically read 3 books this month and DNF'd 1 book, so it hasn't been the best month, but I mean, a lot's been happening for me, so I'm quite happy with what I've read. I'm sorry if the lighting's absolutely horrible in here. You can see like reflection of my glasses. I couldn't film my regular place, so I'm in my bedroom against one of my bookcases. Let's get on to my reading wrap up. So the first book I read this month was Brigid, Kemmerer, Defy the Night. I've read one of her novels before. I've read her debut YA fantasy novel called A Curse So Dark and Lonely, which was a retelling of Beauty and the Beast. I really enjoyed that book, but for some reason or other I didn't decide to read the rest or pick up the rest. But then I heard that she had wrote this book, which is a separate YA fantasy series. So I was interested enough to pick it up, give it a go. I actually really enjoyed this a lot more than I enjoyed A Curse So Dark and Lonely. I gave this book a 4 stars. As I said, I really enjoyed it. It is a dark Robin Hood retelling, which is basically filled with romance and adventure. So if you like romance, if you like fast-paced adventure, and you kind of like a slow burn romance, I think you would definitely like this book. As I said, it is a dark retelling of Robin Hood because it follows the story of outlaws robbing from the rich to give to the poor. But in the story, they're not robbing the rich for money, they're robbing the rich for medicine. This story is set in the kingdom of Kandala. I think that's how, don't know if that's pronounced right, but that's how I read it in the story, which is basically divided into different sectors, and a mysterious illness is sweeping through this kingdom, and there is no cure for it, but there is a medicine that can kind of help reduce the symptoms of the disease and basically stop you from dying from it. But unfortunately, there's only 2 sectors in this kingdom that have the ingredient to make the medicine. And this medicine is called the Moonflower Elixir. Okay, so if you drink this and you're ill with the disease, you should be okay. Okay, so the story opens with the reader meeting one of our main protagonists called Tessa, who is an apothecary during the day, and at night she's an outlaw with her partner Western Lark, where they go steal medicine from the palace and the richest sector in the kingdom, and then go and give it to the poorer people of the kingdom, because it is only the rich who can afford to buy this medicine in this kingdom. And so that's where we basically start off. And alongside Tessa's narrative, so it's like a dual narrative book. So alongside Tessa's narrative, we also have the narrative of Prince Coric, who is the brother to the king, and in this book we learn quickly that he has the important role of the king's justice, which means he keeps the kingdom in line and kind of maintains the law and order of the kingdom. We learn quickly as well that he is a deeply hated character in this book series. People think he's cruel and callous, and that's because of what his policies and the actions he does to make sure that his brother is safe. But also, as the book goes on, we actually learn there is more to this character, and there's a lot of stuff that he's hiding, and this kind of cruel persona he has on is because he's kind of protecting himself, as you learn as the book goes on. I don't want to spoil it too much because it's quite important to the story. So overall, I really enjoyed this book. It's got a slow burn romance. If you don't like slow burn romances, this might not be the book for you, but it's also filled with a lot of adventure and a political intrigue in this book. I thought the characters were really well developed and the world was well fleshed out. There's really good world building by Brigid in this book. I liked how Brigid shows that people are never completely good despite their intentions. They might have the best intentions at heart, but they're never 100% good. I also liked how people are never totally evil either, so I kind of like that portrayal of people and their personalities, and I'm really looking forward to the next installment. That was the first book I read this month. So the next book I read this month was the book I DNF'd in the end, and that was The Vampire Crusade by Dan Davis. I got to like page 74 in the end, and it's about a 270 page book. So this is the book one in the series. I do actually have the second one with me, but because I DNF'd this one, I don't think I'm going to continue them, and I'm just really unhaul them. So this is book one in a series called The Immortal Night Chronicles, and in this book we follow Sir Richard Ashbury, who is 21 years old, and at the start of the book you are completely thrust right into it because we are given a quite graphic detailed account of how his brother's family and his brother are brutally murdered by a group of knights who at the beginning we don't know who they are. He stumbles across his family, but his brother's wife is still alive, but as she is dying, he swears to his brother's wife that he will avenge the family, their deaths, and hunt down and kill the person / group of knights that killed them. And we've also learned after this that the man who slaughtered Richard's family, we soon after learn the identity of the leader of the group of knights who murdered Richard's brother and his family, and that is the Earl William de Ferrers, who was actually a real person. He was a 12th century English nobleman. After Richard finds the identity of William, he spends the rest of the book chasing down William and his group of knights. What I liked about this book was I liked that it was a unique take on vampires, so rather than being set in a fantasy world or modern day, that it's actually set in the medieval period during the Crusades. That really intrigued me, that's why I picked it up. But I think what was the biggest downfall for this book was its execution. I found the narrative and the writing to be really fragmented, and there was quite a few grammatical errors in terms of sentence structures, and pacing felt odd. At points it was really quick, and at other points it was really slow. Also, what partly put me off, it was a bit too gory for me. I think if you don't mind reading passages about gore, I think you would really like this book. I gave this a 2 stars and ultimately just DNF'd it halfway through. But the second book I read this month was The Good Servant by Fern Britton. I really enjoyed this book. I think this had to have been my favourite book this month. I gave it a 4 stars. It was a really enjoyable read. I could not put it down whilst I was reading it. And this book is a fictionalised account of the life of Marion Crawford, who I personally had never heard of prior to reading this book. And Marion Crawford was the governess of Princess Elizabeth, aka the future Queen Elizabeth II of England, and her sister Princess Margaret. She was governess to the girls for 17 years, and we follow her life growing up in Edinburgh, wanting to be a school teacher, then taking on the position to being the governess to the 2 princesses for what she thought would be a short summer break, but ultimately led to her permanent position, as I said, for 17 years before she was dismissed of service because she was no longer needed because the girls had grown up. And then we follow her tragic end of her life, where she is ultimately ostracised by the royal family because of something she has done, which I won't tell because I'm going to do a separate video on this book explaining it more in detail. But so she's ultimately ostracised for the royal family for an event that has divided some people of opinion, whether they feel sympathy or not sympathy for her, and up to her death in, I think it's the 1980s, she passes away. Marion Crawford, she is ignored by the royal family despite spending a lot of her life dedicating it to the girls in the royal family. So overall, this was a really good book. I really enjoyed it, but as I said, I'm not going to say too much because I'm going to do a separate video comparing this book with the book I'm about to mention in a second. A really good book. I think if you like cosy historical fictions which focus on the individual, I think you really enjoy this book. Okay, so the last book I read this month, I'm spoiling the cover. So the last book I read this month was The Governess by Wendy Holden. I gave this 3 stars. I did not enjoy it as much as The Good Servant, and this is another fictionalised retelling of Mary and Crawford's life, but this book was published first, The Governess, in 2020, and then The Good Servant was published this year in 2022. So it's about 2 years difference between the books. This is, from what I have research I've done and from what the author has said, this is the first fiction book about the life of Mary and Crawford. I definitely didn't enjoy this book as much as the first one, and I think that's because this wasn't so much focused on Mary and herself as an individual, but was focused on the politics of the period, so from like the 1930s through to the 1950s, and very much focused more on the royal family as an institution and what working for them was like, compared to The Good Servant, which was much more focused on Mary and herself as an individual. So I think if you're much more interested in the politics of the 1930s through up to the 50s in England and the royal family and what they were like during that time, I think this book would be definitely more for you compared to The Good Servant. But for me, yeah, I personally didn't like it as much. But again, I'm not going to mention any more because I want to do a comparison video on the 2 books and compare portrayals of Mary and Crawford. So these were basically the books I read this month. That was basically my wrap up for the month of September. Let me know if you've read any of the books in the comments, or if you're interested in reading them. And I hope you all take care of yourselves, and then until the next time, bye.